You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
Hey everybody, welcome to Talkin Shop here on The Experience. As you can probably guess, I am not Miss Jen in a beard. Fake beard? No, not Miss Jen. Though she could probably get this look with a hat and a fake Santa Claus beard. But yeah, no, I'm taking the seat for this time and talking to somebody who I very much wanted to talk about a exciting project that's on the stands now. So stick around. We're going to spend an hour with David Pepose. Be right back. All right, everybody, we have our guest today. By the way, stick around today. We got a great lineup. Not only do we have Talkin Shop, we've got comic collectibles later on. And of course, we've got Devil's Advocates, where Kyle and Bronzonite are talking about the war on adult comics. So you'll want to stick around for all that. But we are going to jump right in with our guest. He's a former crime reporter turned Ringo award-winning comic book creator. He's written titles like Savage Avengers, Fantastic Four, The Hulk, Avengers Unlimited, Darth Vader, Black, White, and Red. And of course, his creator-owned project, Spencer Locke. And he's got a bunch of other stuff out there too. So please welcome. And now he and artist Jonathan Lau have brought back the iconic Space Ghost. So please welcome David Pepose.
Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. First thing, you mentioned a minute ago that before the show that we've run in similar circles and been like at conventions at the same time. Yeah. Haven't really had a chance to talk a lot. Am I getting your last name right?
So it's pronounced Pepose, but I never get mad at anybody saying Pepose or Pepose, or it's an occupational hazard having a name like mine. But yes, if you want the official canon approved pronunciation, David Pepose.
Pepose, got it. Because I was sitting there saying it, I'm like, I don't know if that's right.
I've heard every permutation since I was about 7 years old, so it is absolutely no sweat, no problem, buddy.
Yeah, and I'm someone who surprisingly looks like I have a very simple last name, and it gets slaughtered.
Yeah,
it's just Wickline, but everybody's like Wicklin. Why would it?
For a second, I was like, have I been getting it wrong this whole time? Okay, no, I'm glad you've got at least one of us has a straightforward last name.
Yeah. So, we got some good guests hopping in already. We got Lorena and Mr. Knops is here. Good to see you guys. All right, let's go. I like to talk the behind the scenes stuff. I like to talk the creativity part of it. But on a project like this,
yeah,
it's got to be one of those that the line to get the job was probably very long.
I'm sure.
So, I mean, because a lot of us are in the same age groups, one under the other. We grew up either on the 60s version of Space Ghost, the reruns in the 70s, the re-release in the early 80s when they did another cartoon, or, of course, Space Ghost Coast to Coast. So even though there hasn't been a lot of Space Ghost, he's been pretty prevalent.
Yeah.
There's been comics over the years and stuff. So how did you get the job?
Sure. Well, so as far as how I wound up on Space Ghost, I've known Nick Barucci at Dynamite for almost 15 years at this point, dating back to my earliest days as a comics journalist. And when I wound up making the leap to making comics of my own, when I finally gave myself permission to try that, whenever I would put out a new book, there were certain editors that I would always email with my work, and Nick was one of them. And so I think Dynamite kind of kept me on their radar for a little while, and especially in the last couple of years when I made the leap to Marvel. And so working on books like Moon Knight, City of the Dead, and Punisher back to back, I think that's what kind of gave me the critical mass for Dynamite to say, hey, we should work with Pepose on something. And so my editor, Joe Rybamp, he approached me at New York Comic Con just right on the heels after Dynamite had announced their new licensing agreement with Warner Brothers Discovery, where they're going to be doing a line of comics based on Thundercats and Johnny Quest and Powerpuff Girls and, of course, Space Ghost. And so Joe reached out to me and said, we really liked what you did on Moon Knight and what you're doing on Punisher, and would you have any interest or availability to work on Space Ghost? And I had just wrapped up my Punisher miniseries, so I actually my bandwidth had just newly opened up, and it kind of came back to something that happened really at the earliest days of my career. My start in comics, I was an intern at DC Comics. I worked on books like Final Crisis and Batman R.I.P. And when I finally got my foot in the door over there, I promised myself I was going to learn everything I could about the comics industry. And so I learned about all the important figures in comics history, including Alex Toth. And that's when I realized, Space Ghost wasn't just the ironic talk show host from coast to coast. He actually had a pretty rich history. Debuting right on the heels of Adam West's Batman, he was a traditional superhero, granted in the style of the times. And I think it was that summer that I learned about, Space Ghost. And then I also got my hands on Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's run. I believe they'd either had a re-release the trade paperback, or one of the editors had given me one. And reading that, I said, oh, this guy's got some real potential as a superhero, as a serious traditional take. He's got that amazing design. He's got that amazing array of powers. He's got the base and the Phantom Cruiser and Ghost Planet and Jan and Jason Blip and this amazingly stacked bench of villains. Why is this not become a huge thing? And I kind of filed that away in my intern brain. And then 15 years later, it kind of circles back. And I realized, we have the opportunity to take all these amazing ingredients, a character that has every right to be an A-lister, and we get to tell kind of the longest, most cohesive story that's ever been told. And that just felt like an amazing opportunity that I couldn't possibly pass up. And I can tell you that starting on that, I've fallen in love with the characters in such a deep and profound way. And I think as readers continue onto our series, I think they're going to fall in love with them too.
Now, you say the longest run. What is this planned for?
Yeah. So when Dynamite first approached me, they asked, how would you do, would you want to start for a year, and see where it takes us? And so I wound up pitching a very long pitch document. I wrote something like 30 something pages for a pitch document, going really in depth on what we wanted to do on an issue to issue basis. Because I was looking at books like Ryan North on Fantastic Four, or Jed MacKay on Moon Knight, or Steve Orlando on Scarlet Witch. And the thing that they all had in common was that they leaned predominantly on done-in-one stories. And that felt like the best way to kind of maximize our run. So I pitched 12 issues in an annual for this series, and I'm about halfway through writing all of that now. So it's the longest runway I've ever had on a series. There is room to slot in more stories if people want them. But yeah, I feel like the way I've kind of described this series, it's sort of like an Ultimates style relaunch of Space Ghost and his world and his continuity, given that the character had very little backstory and next to no continuity in the original Hanna-Barbera cartoon.
Right.
But yeah, I've taken a lot of influence from Batman: The Long Halloween, J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, Lone Wolf and Cub, even Jurassic Park, particularly the dynamic between Dr. Grant and Lex and Tim. It's just been it's been an amazing gift to have that kind of runway, and then to be able to plan how do we maximize it. And the way that we're doing that is predominantly with done-in-one stories. That way, every month you can pick up an adventure of Space Ghost and know you're getting like a self-contained beginning, middle, and end. And that way, the handful of times that we do a two-parter, we're really reclaiming the power of a cliffhanger. And so that if it says to be continued, that means that Space Ghost is really up the creek, and he's going to have to fight twice as hard to fight his way out.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that there wasn't a lot of backstory
Sure.
for Space Ghost. I mean, I think they gave him a name during Space Ghost Coast to Coast, which was
Yeah.
like Ted.
Tad Ghostal.
What?
Tad Ghostal. Yeah.
Ted, okay. And then I know that DC's version had like Thaddeus something.
Thaddeus Bach and Commander Kier in Future Quest. So he's actually had two different identities over at DC.
Yeah. And how did you approach it? Are you starting from scratch? Do you any of that play into it?
Yes. I wanted to start from scratch. This is brand new continuity. My thinking was both pragmatic in that I don't want anybody to feel like they need to do homework to enjoy our book. The only thing you have to do is pick up issue 1. And on top of that, I also thought, from an ethical and a legal perspective, this is, I'm working with Dynamite. It's a different publisher from DC. I didn't really want to try to figure out what the ethics might be of, do I lift from an entire from a different publisher's continuity? It felt much cleaner to just kind of start just kind of clean slate. So you'll learn Space Ghost's at least his first name in this week's issue of Space Ghost number 2. But yeah, I mean, my thinking was Space Ghost is, as a character, it's always been so interesting to kind of learn the history of it, in that on the one hand, there's something that's so iconic and timeless about that character. On the other hand, he's also a character that seems to be generational. He comes out kind of with a brand new story every 20 years. Whether it's the 60s run, which is a very much a product of its time. It channels the Silver Age energy of Adam West Batman. And then he comes back in Space Stars in the 80s, and you can see that it's trying to stand shoulder to shoulder with Super Friends and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Yeah. And then you've got Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's run in 2005, which it came out just before Batman Begins, but if you looked at it now, you wouldn't know. It felt very much of that zeitgeist. And so for me, that kind of gave me permission to say, okay, we're reinventing Space Ghost in the year 2024. And how do we keep those kind of classic and iconic elements of the character, but still tell the story through the lens of modern day storytelling techniques? And so I think in certain ways, I can't believe I left out Coast to Coast. Coast to Coast coming out, very much representing sort of the MTV irony generation. I can't believe I skipped over that. And I think Coast to Coast in particular, I think is a big reason why we're doing this series right now. Even though we're doing a traditional superhero take, we're not doing the talk show host. That can be for year 2 if Dynamite asks for it. It's more about Space Ghost Coast to Coast kept the character's name in the culture. And if anything, it kind of felt like the way that like a fossil would get preserved in amber. That's what Coast to Coast feels like. And so for me, I get to feel a little bit like an archaeologist, where I'm able to kind of take that amber and get to excavate it and show that the bones are still just as strong as they were in the 60s. So I feel like Space Ghost is a character that everybody kind of has an awareness of the character, but they never really know who he is. And that's something that I'm really excited to be exploring in this book is by the time that you finish reading our series, you're going to know who Space Ghost is, what his dynamic is with Jan and Jason Blip, and what makes this found family of sci-fi adventurers into the greatest superheroes in the galaxy.
Now, I'm assuming with the book having come out a month ago.
Yeah.
You've been on the convention circuit. We live on convention circuits.
Yeah.
Have you had any issues having to explain to people that it's more than a talk show host?
No, I mean, I think a lot of people seeing even just our covers, you see what Francisco Mattina has done, or you see what Jay Lee has done, or you see what Bjorn Behrens or Michael Cho. People very quickly get a sense, this is an adventure book. This is an action book. And granted, my experience just since issue 1 has come out, right now I think I did Free Comic Book Day. I've done some Free Comic Book Day signings since then, and I did another store signing from them. So I haven't hit the convention circuit yet since issue 1 has come out. I will be doing San Diego Comic-Con next month, so I think that'll be my first con since the book has come out. But I think people have seen just from the cover, like, oh, like that Space Ghost, he's an action guy. But yeah, of course, there's been plenty of people who've been like, oh, I only know Space Ghost from coast to coast, or some people being like, oh yeah, I remember watching that as a kid, or seeing reruns on Boomerang. And for me, I always say, well, you're our target audience. I have written this book specifically for, I don't know who Space Ghost is, but this cover or this design looks interesting, and I would like to know more. And that's kind of how I've written it, is that you don't need to know anything about Space Ghost. You don't have to have watched the cartoons. You don't have to have read any other comics. All you need to be interested in is like, oh, hey, this looks cool. And then I think as you read the series, the thing that really stands out the most to me, of course, we have the amazing kind of sci-fi action and spectacle, and we're able to draw from a variety of different influences and genres and inspirations on an issue-to-issue basis, and that is the strength of Space Ghost as a character. Is by being what if Batman fought crime in the Star Wars universe, essentially, that does give a wide variety of stories to cover. But for me, the thing I think is most exciting, and the thing that I love most about this series, getting to explore, it's Space Ghost's dynamic with Jan and Jason Blitt. It's what possesses a cosmic vigilante to bring these kids into his orbit, and how do their kind of complementary tragedies interact with one another, and what is it that about these characters that kind of makes them evolve and change and grow and heal in proximity to one another. And I think there's so much fun interpersonal dynamics between these characters, particularly with Jan and Jace, that I think that's the secret to Space Ghost. That's the thing that makes him stand apart from somebody like Batman. It's not just the sci-fi setting. It's that even more than Batman, who we've seen many, many stories of Batman operating solo, and they feel organic to the character. My hard opinion on Space Ghost is, I don't think you can tell a Space Ghost story without Jan and Jason Blitt. It feels like trying to make an ice cream sundae without the cherry and without the banana. That's what makes him stand apart. Having 3 sidekicks isn't just a coincidence. It's a pattern. It's I think a very deliberate choice. And so being able to flesh these characters out and kind of watch them play off of one another, that's my favorite part of the series. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, you can have all the sci-fi action adventure that you want, but if you don't care about these characters, it doesn't matter. So I'm very excited to be telling this story about Space Ghost, not just kind of reclaiming his humanity, but also kind of his adventures as the ultimate single dad. And what happens for his crime-fighting crusade when he suddenly has to deal with kids, and in this case, his heart running around on the outside. So it's going to be a learning curve for all involved, but it's one that's been really heartening to explore.
All right, I'm going to throw a little curveball at you, because we know that back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, kids' sidekicks were common.
Sure.
They were put into books so the kids reading them would have someone to identify with. Yeah. It's the same thing as Dr. Watson and a Sherlock Holmes story, because we're not going to be able to relate to Sherlock.
Right.
So we get Dr. Watson to do the oohs and ahs that we would be doing.
Yeah.
But we are in a different era, a different mindset.
Sure.
How do you as an author justify the idea of a character like Space Ghost?
Sure.
Or if you were writing Batman or something like that, putting basically children in harm's way repeatedly. How do you justify that as from a character standpoint?
Sure. It's a great question. And it's something that really I wanted to tackle in issues 1 and 2. Without spoiling too much about issue 2, because I think issue 2 kind of does help sell that concept. And by the end of issue 2, Space Ghost actually in no uncertain terms kind of explains why he thinks this is a good idea and why he thinks this is necessary. But I will say for issue 1, and mild spoilers for anybody who hasn't picked up issue 1, you can cover your ears for a minute. The very first question that I asked myself beyond how does Space Ghost powers work is, yes, how do we justify him having sidekicks? Because it's one of those things in the 60s, you didn't question it. It was just, part and parcel of the genre. But yes, in the year 2024, you're going to be asking, why would he, if Space Ghost feels the need to partner up with people, why not do it with grown adults? And also if he feels the need to take in children, why take in children? And why not, just keep them at Ghost Planet? And so we do answer that in issue 2, that even if you stay on Ghost Planet, sometimes the universe comes knocking, and being prepared for it might be sort of the best defense. But I think in issue 1, spoilers, we introduce Brack and Sisto as a pair of corrupt cops, essentially, in the Galactic Patrol. And that was a very deliberate choice on my part, both in that I wanted to give Brack and Sisto a surprise introduction, but also something that speaks to that innate blue collar opportunistic streak that I saw in those characters in the original 60s cartoon. But also I wanted to make it very clear, anybody asking why doesn't Space Ghost just drop these kids off at the nearest Galactic Patrol facility? Well, now it's because the Galactic Patrol has been compromised. They not only don't have the manpower to cover every corner of the galaxy, but you don't know who's in Robocorp's pocket. And so so we do address that in issue 2. So I don't want to spoil anything. But yes, I think for Space Ghost, the way that he sees it is the best way to protect these kids is to train them, in that he knows he can't be with them 24/7. And he knows that sometimes even Ghost Planet itself isn't always the safe haven that he would like for it to be. So being able to train these kids and sort of have them feel more proactive in trying to figure out what led to their family's tragedy. I think that's in certain ways pragmatic, but I think in other ways it's a little subconscious. It's sort of Space Ghost knows that the likelihood of him getting closure for his own personal tragedies is pretty slim. And so for him, he's thinking, I can teach you. I can teach you how to kind of get justice for what happened to your family. And so it's sort of his way of kind of trying to head off that kind of isolation that he's felt. But also I think in a way, subconsciously, he's trying to figure out, like, how do I come back from this a little bit? If I can help somebody else from not experiencing what I did, maybe it'll feel a little better for me. And I think that's what has led him to become a crime fighter. And I think is what's led him to bringing in Jan and Jace. And then I think that is what's led to him bringing them into the field. But that's not to say that Space Ghost won't have moments where he deeply regrets it. And same thing with the kids. This is not sort of a linear progression. Sometimes they're going to be taking 2 steps forward. Sometimes they're going to take a couple steps back. And sometimes these kids are going to get knocked on their butts and they're going to have to lick their wounds and figure out, do we get back on the horse? And I think that's what's so exciting for me about this series is that really on an issue-to-issue basis, their relationship with Space Ghost is kind of an ongoing, dynamic, ever-changing thing. And I think that's what the case is for many families is that, like as kids get older, things start to change. And of course, we get to kind of play it up thanks to all the sci-fi action. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is a coming of age story in a lot of ways. I think to go back to something earlier that you talked about, the kids being, the surrogates for younger kids reading or the Watson, where we're able to go, ooh and ah. The big influence for me, of course, was Kitty Pryde, where she was the point of view character for the X-Men during an era where Chris Claremont had already kind of radically revolutionized these characters. And suddenly there's, all this soap opera going on. And I mean, I can't speak for Chris, but the way that I read it is, this is a way to kind of bring things back to center a little bit, to take all these kind of disparate threads and say, okay, there's a lot going on right now. Let's tighten this a little bit. And we can have Kitty kind of triage what's important for all this before we make things all crazy again. And that's how I feel about Space Ghost, is having these point of view characters that you can say, Space Ghost has been doing his own thing for a while, but here's 2 point of view characters who have no idea about Space Ghost. they then become the audience surrogate, regardless of age, that we get to kind of explore Space Ghost and his universe through their eyes, and with all the wonder and humor and heart and action and suspense that comes with it.
Now, you mentioned Brack and Sisto.
Yeah.
Now, I know that when they did the 60s cartoon, he had a set of villains.
Yeah.
And the 80s, they almost had a different set of villains. Like they brought in
Yeah.
a bunch of new villains.
Yes.
How much are you pulling from the 60s villains? Are you touching the 80s villains?
Yep.
Are you doing new ones? What type of things can we look forward to?
Yes. Well, definitely plan on seeing all the iconic villains from the 60s. But we also do have a few deep cuts from the 80s as well, coming through all this. Yeah, the way that I wound up kind of triaging it, Alex Toth was throwing out fastball after fastball with these villains, because anyone watching the original Space Ghost, and I rewatched every single episode from the 60s and 80s run in preparation for this, and I took detailed notes on every single episode. Those are 5 minutes a pop. There's no time for backstory. It's sort of, we introduce the villain and their plot, and then Space Ghost jumps in and the kids jump in, and we have barely enough time to sort of put them in jeopardy, and then he figures out a way to fight his way out. There's no backstory, there's no continuity, which is what makes the Council of Doom 6-parter at the end of the 60s run whiplash in the best possible way, where most of these stories are all kind of free floating, then suddenly all the villains are together, and whoa, it's like all it's one big long storyline. So for me, I going through, it's like, okay, if I'm trying to pace this out over 13 chapters, I had to triage, like, okay, which are the villains that I absolutely feel I need to use, that I think can headline their own adventure. I don't think it's spoiling too much that, like, I'm going to be introducing every member of the Council of Doom, and you can probably guess why that is. But also certain villains where I'm like, okay, Tanzit and Brago and Lurker and One Eye, where maybe in the original cartoons they didn't have quite as strong of a personality as somebody like Brack or the Widow or Creature King. But I was like, okay, we got to find a place to fit them in. Or King Ramora and the Space Sharks, which I'll have to look it up, but I believe that's an 80s invention. And I know he and Glasstor show up very briefly in cameos in issue 3. So they were figuring out villains, like, okay, who, if we want to throw in a cameo somewhere, who do we throw in? And then, and then there were a handful of villains that I've sort of left in my back pocket that, if the demand is there, if people want more Space Ghost, we can kind of slot those in. But yeah, all the major villains that you're going to be expecting, we're going to be showing them. The fun part about all this, though, is figuring out, it was a little bit of a Rorschach test for me. We're figuring out, watching all these original episodes, what about each of these villains really stood out to me? What about their personalities kind of really resonated with me? And then what kind of wrinkles and twists could we add to these characters to really play that up? So, like I said, for Brack, the opportunistic streak, the blue collar aspirations of it all. He's not out there looking to conquer the universe. He's somebody who's looking to knock over the nearest gold freighter. And so that kind of, we were able to kind of twist that into him becoming, him and his brother becoming corrupt cops. Or somebody like the Widow, for example, where obviously she's not going into a conflict, with her fists. This is somebody who, between her Tyrannopod spores, or spider plants, I believe they're called. She's like the thinker, the way that I kind of described her was sort of like the Penguin meets Poison Ivy with a little bit of Catwoman thrown in there. Zorak, I'm super excited by, because that was a character who immediately you see his design, and Alex Toth spoke so much through his designs. That is a character that kind of radiates menace because he's so inhuman. He's unlike Space Ghost, who, by virtue of his name and his costume, he's a man playing at being a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Zorak is a monster. That is a homicidal praying mantis. His brain is wired differently from a human brain. And so what kind of wrinkles could we kind of throw at that character to really play up that alien perspective on the world? That he's not just Space Ghost Joker, although I know that's an easy shorthand. This is a character, this is the one villain that like scares Space Ghost. The one that he's like, I can't predict this guy, and like, he's a bloodthirsty criminal, and like, what do I do? And so Yeah, I mean, the way, I guess I can give you a little exclusive on this. The way that I had pitched Zorak, for example, when I pitched this to the series to Warner Brothers, and issue 4 is already lettered, so they can't stop me. I pitched it as he's the Charles Manson of space, and that's kind of the thing that like strikes a lot of terror with Space Ghost and introduces a lot of complications when Jan and Jace are in the mix. So being able to kind of do this with all of the villains, it's been such a treat, because it makes each individual storyline kind of have its own unique angle, but it also kind of allows us to throw in some curveballs. Honestly, an inspiration that I didn't think about it until we're talking about it right now. The early episodes, Machinima did a reimagining Mortal Kombat years ago. And you watch those original episodes, and I'm realizing like, oh, there's a lot of shared DNA in there, in the way that like they reimagined like Scorpion and Jax and Sonya Blade and Commander Stryker. Just in those early episodes, I can see a lot of shared DNA in the way that we're approaching, trying to make these villains still as iconic as the way that Alex Toth envisioned them, but to kind of add a unique wrinkle and flavor and spin to each and every one of them.
All right, we need to take a quick break. We will come back in probably just about a minute, so we'll be right back with David Pepose.
Download our app on Google Play and the App Store. It's so simple, even my mommy can use it. In a world where you hit like and subscribe on our YouTube channel, that'd be really great. Thanks.
I should have planned that better. We could have done the It's the Brack Show coming back out of it. That would have been funny. For you guys just joining us, we're talking to David Pepose, the writer of Space Ghost, the new series from Dynamite. You're teamed up with Jonathan Lau on that. And there are some amazing covers by Francesco Mattina, Bjorn Behrens, Jay Lee, and of course, the Michael Cho ones. I mean, they're all gorgeous, but the Michael Cho ones feel like the older show.
Yeah. The Michael Cho covers are really spectacular. I mean, and the way that he's kind of pushed that classic style, seeing it, particularly his issue 3 cover. I think that one is it's a tough competition, but I think that one might be my favorite. Just seeing how far he can kind of take that classic style and still push it and elevate it. But yeah, I've been very lucky to be working with the amazing cover artists that I have. I really do think they've led me to believe that covers are half the battle. You need to be able to kind of sell a concept just visually and to get people interested and excited and engaged. And seeing the way that people have responded every time I post a cover, doesn't matter which of those amazingly 4 artists that we're posting. It's just showing that the sheer level of quality, the bar has been raised really high with these 4 artists. And so I couldn't be luckier and more fortunate to be working with them, as well as our interior team. Jonathan Lau and Andrew Dahlhaus are just a real dynamic duo, just a pair of artists, and teaming them up with Taylor Esposito, a letterer who I actually owe my career to. It's really, I feel in good hands as the weak link of that team. And so it's very nice to be kind of working with such a group of consummate professionals. And they're really inspiring me to swing for the fences. So it's been a wonderful experience working with them in this book.
it's like each one of the artists brings a different feel to the
Yeah,
cover. Francesco's always seem very ethereal and very cosmic,
yeah,
where Bjorn's are much more brutal.
yeah, very gritty and intense.
Yeah. And
And then
then Jay's are all very iconic.
yeah, Jay, has such a fun experimental side to him,
Yeah.
and seeing how dynamically he does these covers. Um, yeah, I mean, every month I see the covers roll out, usually on Twitter, and I'm just as surprised and excited as anybody else, and I see them, and I turn to my fiance. We're always kind of like, oh, okay, which one's our favorite this month? And the fact that she and I never agree
Yeah.
on that, I think that speaks to how well Dynamite has cast this book, in that, that's how I've always viewed variant covers, and I know that there's an economic rationale behind it for all the collectors. But for me, the way I always approached it was, I want to have a cover for everybody. So if you're not vibing on cover A, maybe you might like cover D, or B or C. And so the fact that we really seem to have a cover for everybody, and I've noticed that even in the signings that I've done since, is it's like a litmus test. Somebody walks up and there's one cover that their eyes just gravitate towards, and it's never the same one. So it's been a really fun experience getting to see that. Definitely some of the best cover artists I've ever worked with.
Yeah, I can honestly say that when a new book comes out, whatever company it is, and they've got multiple covers, there's usually that one cover. It's like, oh, that's the one I want. But there's also the ones like, I really hope that's not the last one.
Yeah.
That kind of, no, that's not for me. And I can honestly say that because, I do stuff with Dynamite as well. I do promotional stuff for them.
Yeah.
So I get to see these a little bit ahead. I have yet to see a Space Ghost cover that I wouldn't grab.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing compliment. And I think, Joe Rybank did some really spectacular work kind of enlisting that amazing quartet of artists. And I'm very grateful and feel very fortunate to have these amazing covers on our work. And I think it is half the battle, and I think it really represents our book very well.
Okay, but come on, there's one cover artist we haven't talked about.
That had to be who you're talking about.
That had to be we got who?
Yeah, I got an email from Vincent Faust over at Dynamite. We were talking about something promotional for issue 1, I believe, leading into the issue 1 dropping. And Vincent says, "Oh, by the way, we have a variant cover for issue 2 by Joe Quesada." And I swear, I feel like I almost fell out of my chair. Joe is to call him a hero of mine is underselling it. That guy, I've been lucky enough to see him in person, and I believe we might have met once in passing at a con. But to see the energy and enthusiasm that he always brought to the comics medium, he struck me as kind of maybe the most natural ambassador for comics since Stan Lee. And to see not just the way that he's represented comics, but the way that he's really kind of shaped the history of modern comics through his stewardship of Marvel Knights, and then obviously his long tenure as editor-in-chief at Marvel. I wouldn't have a career without that guy. I don't know if I would want to have a career in this industry if Joe Quesada had not been such a part of it. I don't know if this industry would still exist without Joe Quesada's influence. But to have that kind of history involved in my book, that means a lot to me. I think that is something that I've always brought to comics in general, and that's why I love this industry as much as I do. Is especially for when you're doing licensed work like this, you do find yourself thinking like, oh, I'm sort of feeling like I'm part of something that's bigger than myself. And especially for something like Space Ghost, where there's been very few people involved in writing it. It's to say, I'm already part of an elite group just having written for Marvel, then you got to shrink that even more as far as Space Ghost is concerned. So to have somebody like Joe delivering such an amazing cover. It really it's a bucket list item I never knew I had. But yeah, I'm so stoked for people to be seeing that cover. And yeah, when I got that email, it was certainly a not so much a pinch me moment as much as my soul left my body moment. But yeah, very excited.
Now, we talked about the cover artist, Jonathan Lau.
Yeah.
There is something about his work. Now, it's interesting where Dynamite uses him.
Yeah.
They kind of save him for superhero books, which you don't think of for Dynamite, but the Project Superpowers, or when they were doing the Solar Man of the Atom, they had gotten him for that. So obvious, perfect choice for this book, but he's really nailing it on this.
Is. So, Jonathan, prior to working on Space Ghost, he'd been working on Vampirella. And I know he was like, oh yeah, I'm really feeling this like superhero thing. And that I want my next project to be superhero related. I've been a big fan of Jonathan since his work on Green Hornet with Kevin Smith, which was, I think it was either that or Lone Ranger, I think were the first Dynamite books I ever read. And I was so taken with how kinetic Jonathan's style is, particularly the way that he does motion. He has a really interesting kind of signature quality to his art in the way that he'll manipulate air around a character. And so you'll see dust swirling to really kind of represent like either somebody's moving or something big just happened. And so when Joe Rabin and I were talking about like who might be a good fit for the book, and Joe mentioned Jonathan, I kind of ended the conversation there. I was just like, yeah, it's got to be him. That's the guy. And as Jonathan was turning in his initial pages, I felt very vindicated in that he's able to kind of hit all the notes that we need for a Space Ghost book to work. And then, of course, he's got these amazing, big, blockbuster sci-fi action sequences. We've got a sequence in issue 2 that I'm not spoiling anything because those preview pages are out. But we see Space Ghost like hurtle into the stratosphere to punch out an asteroid field. And I had written it sort of as just like a quick way to kind of recap Space Ghost's origin, how he goes from being sort of the sole survivor of Planet Vector to becoming this cosmic vigilante, but also to show that like having these kids in his otherwise stable life, like he's not thrilled with it. He's definitely got some stuff going on. I wrote it thinking, oh, that'd be fun. And then Jonathan turns in the art and suddenly I'm like, whoa. I think that's way better looking than I was expecting. And then Andrew slaps his colors down on it. And suddenly I'm like, oh, I think this is the most beautiful like sequence I've ever been a part of. Amazing. So, Jonathan's able to hit these moments, but what he's even better at are the character beats. You see Jan and Jace, and like they're kids, they're not like little adults, with adult musculature and adult features. I saw a review saying in very glowing terms, but they said that they were shocked that that nobody was sexualizing Jan. And I was like, God, no, we're not, she's a child. We're not doing that. Jonathan knows that these are kids. And not only knows that they're kids, but also treats them as co-leads of this book. Because I described it to him immediately as this is an ensemble story. We're not having stories with Space Ghost without those kids. Jan and Jason Blip are every bit as important to the story as Space Ghost himself. And so it'd be easy to kind of shove them off in the sidelines or to sort of like say, well, we're focusing only on Space Ghost here. Jonathan gets the assignment. And he knows that a lot of it's on his shoulders for making you fall in love with these characters, because I can write all the emotion that I want, but Jonathan's the one kind of selling that acting. And seeing the way that he's portrayed Jan and Jace, I knew he was the right fit for this book. And so seeing the way that Jonathan's been doing it, he's incredibly talented. He's incredibly versatile, and he draws like a Terminator. I mean, that guy is like constantly. I'm like, okay, I got to turn in another script because Jonathan's about to finish this one. It's the best kind of anxiety. He's just a fantastic collaborator and just a real a true artist, and being able to have him and Andrew and Taylor kind of as part of our squad. Yeah, it's really it's really wonderful.
Now, the way you've been describing how you put this whole thing together, it almost sounds like you've put a jigsaw puzzle together.
Sure.
But you had the characters that were introduced in the 60s, but there wasn't a lot of backstory and stuff. And then you go over to the 80s, you got those characters you're pulling in. Would that be how you describe it? And also,
Yeah,
how many pieces of your own are you putting in there?
that's a great question. So, I think for me, when I started kind of, when Joe approached me about Space Ghost, my first instinct was I wanted to kind of refresh myself on Space Ghost and his mythology. And so the first thing I did was I just did the rewatch, and I watched every episode and I took notes in every single episode just to kind of binge the whole thing and get a sense of like, okay, what are sort of the things that stand out the most to me, and in particular, like how does he work, because that's a character, like many Silver Age characters, had a million powers, and so trying to figure out in my head like how does that work so I can choreograph him properly and give him limitations and give him an actual threat. So as I was watching it, the thing I was really struck because a couple things. I was struck at how much Jan and Jason Blip impacted every story. Because like I said, my first introduction to a serious Space Ghost was the Joe Kelly run, in which that is very much a standalone superhero origin about Space Ghost. And Jan and Jason Blip, while they do appear a little bit, they don't factor that heavily into the story. And that was, I think, kind of a big light bulb moment for me, where I said, okay, like I could try to do a standalone superhero story, but I've been beaten to the punch by almost 20 years for that. I don't want to try to retread ground that Joe and Ariel already handled so well. So that was sort of my initial pivot was, like nobody's really told a story about the kids. And so I described the story as less of a Space Ghost year one and more of a Jan and Jace year one. I think the and I'm so glad you asked this about the personal bit of the puzzle. And it took me a little while as I was writing it, but I realized that this is a very personal story for me. A little bit of a personal history on me is my younger siblings are triplets. It was 10 days shy before my 9th birthday when my siblings were born. And sometimes I kind of feel like the dinosaur, like watching the asteroid hit in that moment, and that everything I had known about my life as an only child at that moment just evaporated.
Yeah.
And it was like a whole new life. It was a big adjustment curve for everybody. But at the same time, like, you see these kids, they're defenseless. Like you have to take care of them. And how does that kind of change your life? So that's why I'm not scared about anything in the comics industry, because I've already survived triplets. But I'm realizing that Space Ghost, that's exactly his trajectory is. While of course he's kind of been marinating in his own personal tragedy and hasn't particularly moved forward with it, has kind of shoved that humanity way down in favor of just like fighting space pirates. This is a guy who suddenly now has to count everything in threes. And suddenly he's realizing that like, having kids means that your heart is running around on the outside. Yeah. And you can have all the powers in the world, but like the world's still gonna, take its knocks on these kids. That's part of growing up. And all you can do is kind of make sure that they survive it and make sure that they you're there to kind of help them up when life knocks them on their butt. Mm-hmm. And that I think has been really fun. I mean, my siblings are each have very distinct personalities. If you watch Thor Ragnarok, with Thor and Loki and Hela, it's not too similar or not too dissimilar from how my siblings grew up. But I think that kind of helped me really focus on Jan and Jace and Blip in terms of personalities. Jan, I always said, like, who was born first? My siblings were born a minute apart. And it really distinguished their entire hierarchy for almost 30 years.
Yeah, he was born first.
Yeah, so like for me, I'm like Jan was born first. She's clearly like a firstborn. She's like many only girls in a family. She had to be the responsible one. She's the one who has to think things through. But that can be annoying. And so she's also feisty, and she's the one who will tell off Space Ghost to his face. But she's also a crack shot with a blaster, and she's she's maybe the most street smart out of all of them. Whereas Jace, he's impulsive. He's a gearhead. He's a natural kind of pilot. Like, he's good with his hands. But he's also the one that, like, he's the comic relief. He's the one who's always rattling off jokes because he feels like if I don't keep morale up, if I don't make everybody laugh, then, like, what little family I have left is going to go their separate ways. And so there's, like, an inherent sweetness to that character. And so watching Jan and Jace as their own yin and yang. And then, of course, Blip is just he's the loyal family pet. He loves these kids, but also he's got a mischievous side to him. He's food crazy, and also, but he also, like, he loves perching on, like, anybody's shoulder. So he loves affection. It's like my puppy at home. Watching those three as their own kind of unit, and then watching them play off Space Ghost as, like, the straight man. That's a lot of fun for me. Whereas Space Ghost has a very dry sense of humor, but it's often at the kid's expense. And so, it's like sometimes he just gets, like, a little frustrated with these kids, and then sometimes he'll just let out a zinger at them. But I think that speaks to what I love about Space Ghost, is that at his core, there's this inherent nobility. This is a guy who he knows these kids have nothing else. They have nowhere else to go. And so he says, I'm going to take them in. And then quickly realizes he's in way over his head. And seeing that, like, he's going to do this, he's going to step up, but, like, there is a degree of irritability, and there is a degree of, like, he kind of screws it up a lot. It's really fun and makes him very complex and fun to follow. In that, like, he's not a natural dad, like he is a natural crime fighter, but boy, is he going to try. And the fact that every day he gets up and tries to do right by these kids, I think that's what makes him a hero, far more than, like, punching out, like, whatever bad guy. It's about looking out for the little guy. And that's what Space Ghost is doing for these kids, and that's what these kids are doing for everybody else. So it's a nice cycle that I've been really enjoying writing.
The Bachelor with the new kids, were you at all tempted to add a character like an Alfred or a Mr. French, showing you how old I am?
I think it speaks to, just Alex Toth. He left me all the ingredients I'd ever need. It really, the thing that struck me so much is this felt like walking into like a 5-star kitchen with, like, all the most quality ingredients you could get on planet Earth. And then somebody walking in and saying, oh, by the way, like, nobody's really ever made a meal with any of this. For me to, like, there's so many good ingredients that, like, I'm going to have my hands full just utilizing all of them, that trying to, like, bring in, like, oh, and then, like, and here's Poochie, it would feel like tainting the recipe. We're going to be really digging in deep with all the characters that Alex Toth and company have left us, but we're going to be adding in plenty of new wrinkles and twists to all of them. So, we're hoping that they all still feel fresh and new. But yeah, I think the ingredients have always been there. Just nobody's really had the opportunity to tell a story at that length. And so we're very excited to be kind of telling this very concrete beginning, middle, and end story with Space Ghost, and to watch him grow and evolve with these kids.
Now, Lorena from chat asks, do you have an all-time favorite comic book character?
Oh boy. The easy answer is Spider-Man. Amazing Spider-Man 346 is the reason I'm here today. Love the character. The fact that I was able to write him even once in the pages of Spider-Verse Unlimited was just a career highlight, a lifetime highlight, really. And yes, I would love the opportunity to write Spider-Man again. I wrote Miles Morales a lot in Savage Avengers, which was a lot of fun. Spider-Man is probably my favorite. I'd love to tackle, like, Doctor Strange or Iron Man or War Machine or in the future, but yeah, my heart's always Spider-Man.
Nice. All right. We got maybe a minute and a half left.
Yeah.
For those who are still on the fence or the people just tuning in, hit me with the Space Ghost sales pitch. Hit me with that, why they should pick it up.
Space Ghost is a character that's like, what if Batman fought crime in the Star Wars universe? It's a story that's self-contained. You don't have to have read anything to enjoy it. But we've also got like tons of cool sci-fi action and adventure that you're going to get in self-contained stories each and every month. This is a character that's got it's a family story. So you've got these amazing sidekicks that you're gonna fall in love with, but also this amazingly deeply stacked bench of villains that's every bit as iconic as Spider-Man or Batman or the Flash. And the fact that we're going to be telling a variety of different tones and genres for each and every issue, you're going to get like the whole smorgasbord with this series, and you don't have to have read a single other book to do it. All you need to do to get on the ground floor is pick up issue 1, and we will keep kind of getting you up to speed each and every issue. So, check out Space Ghost. This is the kind of comic that everybody says that they want, and we've been listening, and we're going to deliver it to you.
By the way, folks, on the inside front cover is a little synopsis or a little teaser to get you into the issue. And if you read it in the voice of Gary Owens, it's going to be perfect. Yeah, I just finished issue 2 before the interview, so loved it.
Thank you. That's one of my favorite single issues I've written in some time.
All right, David, thank you for your time and for coming on, and good luck with the book. I hope it just sells gangbusters, and I know it has been, but I hope it continues, and you get to do just as many issues as you want to.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. For everyone listening, call your local comic shop. You can still pre-order issues 3 and 4 of Space Ghost. Just tell them you want to add Space Ghost to your pull list, and we'll see you each and every month. All
right, go get your Space Ghost comics, but stick around right now. Comic Collectibles is coming up next. See you later.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.